The bustling hub of New Horizon Colony was shrouded in an eerie silence as the massive Viraxian warships descended from the heavens. Sleek and angular, they blotted out the sun, casting long shadows over the towering spires and sprawling habitats that made up the human settlement. Commander Evelyn Rains watched with a grim expression as the alien armada surrounded the colony, their weapons systems powering up with an ominous hum. A veteran of numerous skirmishes on the frontier, she had never faced an enemy as formidable as the Viraxians. Their technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, and their military might was the stuff of legends. "All defense forces, report in." Evelyn barked into her comm, her fingers flying across the touchscreen displays. "I want a full tactical assessment immediately." One by one, the commanders of the colony's modest defense fleet checked in, their voices tinged with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that against the Viraxian juggernaut, their chances of survival were slim at best. "Captain Liam Murdoch reporting, ma'am." A gruff voice crackled over the line. "Our sensors are detecting over 50 enemy capital ships, along with hundreds of smaller attack craft. Their weapons are powered up and targeting our position." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. 50 capital ships, each one capable of leveling a continent with a single salvo. And they had mere hundreds of outdated fighters and obsolete cruisers to defend an entire colony of millions. "What's the status of our planetary defenses?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not good, Commander," Murdoch replied grimly. "Our orbital defense platforms are taking heavy fire, and our ground-based missile batteries are being systematically destroyed. We're barely making a dent in their shields." Evelyn's mind raced, searching for any possible avenue of escape or defense. But the Viraxians had them completely surrounded, their superior numbers and firepower leaving no room for maneuver. "What about the civilians?" she asked, her heart sinking. "Can we evacuate them before the attack begins?" There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. "Negative, ma'am. The enemy has deployed a tight-beam jamming field, disrupting all long-range communications and transport systems. We're cut off from the rest of the colony." Evelyn clenched her fists, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. She had spent years preparing for this moment, but now, faced with the raw power of the Viraxian war machine, all her carefully laid plans seemed woefully inadequate. "Orders, Commander?" Murdoch asked, his voice tinged with a hint of desperation. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. "All defense forces, stand your ground. We may be outmatched, but we will not go down without a fight. Prepare for the enemy's assault. I want every cannon, every missile, and every fighter ready to engage. We'll show these aliens that humanity doesn't surrender easily." A chorus of affirmations echoed through the comm, and Evelyn could sense the renewed determination in her troops. They might be facing impossible odds, but they were willing to go down swinging. As the Viraxian fleet began its bombardment, raining down a hail of energy beams and plasma torpedoes, Evelyn turned her gaze skyward, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and resolve. "This isn't over, General Tsarkin," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of the battle. "We may be outmatched, but we have something you'll never understand: the will to survive." She turned back to her console, her fingers flying across the controls as she issued a final set of orders. The fate of New Horizon Colony, and perhaps the entire human race, now rested on her shoulders. As the Viraxian bombardment rained down upon New Horizon Colony, Commander Evelyn Rains hurried through the bustling halls of the colony's central command center. Alarms blared, and the floor trembled with the force of the alien attack. But Evelyn remained steadfast, her mind racing as she formulated a plan of action. Entering the tactical operations room, she was met by a scene of controlled chaos. Holographic displays flickered with real-time data on the Viraxian assault, while harried officers barked orders into their communication devices. "Report," Evelyn demanded, her voice cutting through the din. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a brilliant young tactician, stepped forward, her brow furrowed with concern. "The enemy is hitting us hard, Commander. Their capital ships are systematically destroying our orbital defenses and ground-based missile batteries. We're taking heavy casualties, and our fighter squadrons are barely making a dent in their shields." Evelyn nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts. "What about our own offensive capabilities? Can we mount a counterattack?" Chen shook her head. "No, ma'am. Our weapons systems are simply no match for the Viraxians. Even our most advanced missiles are being intercepted or deflected by their shields. We're outgunned and outmatched in every possible way." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she refused to let her frustration show. "Then we'll have to find another way to even the odds. Chen, I want you to gather the senior staff. We need to come up with a plan, and fast." As the young lieutenant hurried to assemble the team, Evelyn turned her attention to the larger-than-life holographic display at the center of the room. The image showed the Viraxian fleet closing in, their sleek warships raining down devastation upon the colonial defenses. "They're too powerful, too advanced," Evelyn murmured, her eyes narrowing. "But they're also arrogant. They think they can just steamroll over us without breaking a sweat." A glimmer of an idea began to take shape in her mind, and she felt a surge of determination. It was a long shot, but if they played their cards right, they just might have a chance. Minutes later, the senior staff had assembled, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. "All right, people, listen up," Evelyn began, her voice clear and commanding. "The Viraxians may have us outgunned and outmatched, but they're also predictable. They're used to facing opponents who can't stand up to their firepower, which means they'll be expecting a conventional defense." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But we're not going to give them that. We're going to hit them where they least expect it, using their own arrogance against them." Chen's eyes widened with realization. "You have a plan, don't you?" Evelyn nodded, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "Oh, yes. And it's going to require every ounce of skill and ingenuity we can muster. Are you all with me?" The assembled officers exchanged glances, then turned back to Evelyn, their expressions resolute. "Whatever you need, Commander," Captain Murdoch rumbled. "We're ready to follow your lead." Evelyn nodded, her confidence growing. "All right then. Here's what we're going to do." For the next hour, the senior staff huddled around the holographic display, their voices rising and falling as they hammered out the details of Evelyn's daring plan. The fate of the colony rested on their shoulders, and they were determined to give the Viraxians a fight they would never forget. As the final preparations were made, Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle to come. The Viraxians might have the advantage, but she had something far more powerful on her side: the unbreakable spirit of the human colonists. "Let's show these aliens what we're made of," she said, her eyes gleaming with a fierce determination. "This is our home, and we're not going down without a fight." With that, she turned and strode out of the command center, her footsteps echoing with purpose. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the Viraxian Empire. The Viraxian fleet continued its relentless bombardment, unleashing wave after wave of devastating energy beams and plasma torpedoes upon the beleaguered human defenders. Massive explosions rocked the surface of New Horizon Colony as the alien weapons tore through the colony's defenses, reducing entire city blocks to smoldering ruins. Yet, despite the overwhelming firepower, the human forces stubbornly refused to surrender. Evelyn Rain's daring plan was now in motion, and she watched with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation as it began to unfold. "All units, maintain your positions," she ordered, her voice calm and steady over the comm. "Remember the plan. Wait for my signal." Across the battlefield, the human fighters and cruisers held their ground, their weapons primed but their barrels silent. The Viraxians, confident in their superiority, continued their assault, pressing ever closer to the heart of the colony. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in the distance, and a massive explosion ripped through the Viraxian formation. One of their capital ships, its shields stripped away by a precisely timed barrage, was torn apart by the force of the blast. "Now," Evelyn shouted, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "All units, engage the enemy." At her command, the human forces sprang into action, their weapons unleashing a torrent of fire upon the stunned Viraxians. Caught off guard by the sudden counterattack, the alien fleet struggled to regain its footing, its cohesion quickly unraveling as the human forces exploited every weakness. "They're breaking formation," Chen exclaimed, her fingers dancing across the console. "Keep the pressure on. Don't let them regroup." Evelyn nodded, her gaze intense as she watched the battle unfold. The Viraxians, used to overwhelming their opponents with sheer firepower, were now finding themselves outmaneuvered and outmatched by the human defenders. "What's their status?" she asked, her voice terse. "Shields down on 3 more capital ships," Chen reported. "Our fighters are taking heavy losses, but they're inflicting significant damage on the enemy's support craft." Evelyn's lips thinned into a grim line. "Casualties." "Too high," Chen replied, her voice tinged with regret. "But we're holding our own, Commander. The plan is working. We're keeping them off balance and preventing them from concentrating their forces." Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. The Viraxians were a formidable foe, and she knew that the battle was far from over. But for now, the human defenders had the upper hand, and she was determined to make the most of it. "Keep up the pressure," she ordered. "We need to cripple as many of their capital ships as possible. Once they're down, we'll hit them with everything we've got." As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn in the humans' favor. Evelyn's carefully orchestrated plan was disrupting the Viraxians' overwhelming firepower, forcing them to divide their attention and react to the unexpected human tactics. Explosions rocked the Viraxian fleet as more of their ships were disabled, their hulls breached, and their systems crippled by the relentless human assault. General Sarkin, the Viraxian commander, watched with growing alarm as his invasion force crumbled before his eyes. "Impossible," he snarled, his clawed fists clenching in fury. "These primitives should not be able to resist us." But the humans refused to be cowed, their determination only fueling their ferocity. Evelyn's plan had worked, and now the Viraxians were the ones struggling to keep up. As the battle raged on, the colony's defense forces pressed their advantage, pushing the enemy back and gradually reclaiming the skies over New Horizon. The Viraxians, their aura of invincibility shattered, were beginning to falter, their once unstoppable juggernaut grinding to a halt in the face of the human defenders' resilience. Evelyn watched the unfolding battle with a grim satisfaction, her mind already turning to the next phase of her plan. The Viraxians had underestimated the human spirit, and now they were paying the price. This was only the beginning of their downfall. The skies over New Horizon Colony crackled with the sound of weapons fire as the human defenders fought to hold back the Viraxian onslaught. Despite the overwhelming odds, the colonists refused to surrender, their determination fueled by a burning desire to protect their home. At the heart of the battle stood Commander Evelyn Rains, her eyes narrowed with fierce concentration as she directed her forces with a calm, unwavering hand. Her carefully crafted strategy had thrown the vaunted Viraxian war machine into disarray, and now she was determined to capitalize on their momentum. "All units, maintain your positions," Evelyn ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've got them on the defensive. Let's keep the pressure on." Across the battlefield, the human pilots and ground crews fought with a tenacity that caught the Viraxians off guard. Their outdated but well-maintained fighters darted and weaved, expertly exploiting the weaknesses in the alien warship's shields and armor. One by one, the Viraxian capital ships began to falter, their massive hulls battered by the relentless human assault. General Sarkin, the alien commander, watched with mounting fury as his invasion force crumbled before his eyes. "Unacceptable," he growled, his clawed hands tightening around the armrests of his command chair. "These primitive humans should not be able to resist us. Dispatch the elite warrior caste. Crush them all." At his order, a squadron of sleek, heavily armored Viraxian fighters peeled off from the main fleet, their ion cannons blazing with deadly precision. Evelyn's eyes widened as she saw the deadly new threat approach, and she quickly relayed the warning to her forces. All units, brace for impact. Those fighters are going to hit us hard. Stay focused and hold your ground. The human pilots steeled themselves, their fingers tightening on the triggers of their weapons as the Viraxian warriors descended upon them. In the ensuing melee, the skies above New Horizon erupted into a furious clash of advanced alien technology and human ingenuity. Evelyn watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The Viraxian elite were a formidable foe, their skills honed through centuries of combat experience. But the human colonists, driven by a fierce desire to protect their home, refused to be cowed. One by one, the human fighters were picked off by the Viraxian warriors, their hulls shredded by the devastating ion beams. But for every fighter they lost, the colonists fought back with renewed ferocity, their outdated weapons finding chinks in the alien craft's armor. "We can't hold them off much longer, Commander," Chen shouted, her face etched with worry. "We're taking heavy casualties, and our ammunition is running low." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she refused to let her resolve waver. "Hang in there, Lieutenant. We just need to buy a little more time." As the battle raged on, the human colonists began to rally, their spirits buoyed by Evelyn's unwavering leadership. Inspired by her courage and determination, they fought with a tenacity that the Viraxians had never before encountered. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn in the humans' favor. The elite Viraxian warriors, faced with an enemy that refused to break, began to falter, their once unstoppable onslaught grinding to a halt. General Xarkin watched in disbelief as his elite forces were beaten back, his clawed hands clenching in frustration. "Impossible," he roared, slamming his fist against the console. "How can these primitives resist us?" Evelyn, sensing the shift in the battle, seized the opportunity. "All units, concentrate your fire on the enemy flagship," she ordered, her voice ringing with determination. "We'll take out their command and control, then hit the rest of their fleet with everything we've got." The human forces, their spirits renewed, unleashed a devastating barrage upon the Viraxian flagship. Caught off guard by the sudden onslaught, the alien vessel was torn apart, its shields collapsing under the relentless human assault. As the Viraxian flagship exploded in a brilliant display of light and fire, a cheer went up from the human defenders. The tide had turned, and the mighty Viraxian war machine was beginning to falter in the face of the colonists' unbreakable spirit. Evelyn, her face etched with a grim satisfaction, turned her attention to the rest of the enemy fleet. The Viraxians had underestimated the human spirit, and now they were about to pay the ultimate price. The destruction of the Viraxian flagship sent shockwaves through the alien fleet, shattering their aura of invincibility and eroding their confidence. As the massive vessel erupted in a brilliant display of light and fire, the human defenders let out a roar of triumph, their spirits lifted by the sight of the enemy's vulnerability. Evelyn Rains, her eyes narrowed with fierce determination, quickly seized the initiative. "All units, press the attack," she barked into the comm, her voice ringing with authority. "We've got them on the ropes. Let's finish this." Inspired by their commander's unwavering leadership, the human forces redoubled their efforts, unleashing a withering barrage of energy beams, missiles, and kinetic projectiles upon the reeling Viraxian fleet. The alien warships, their shields weakened by the earlier assault, struggled to maintain their cohesion as the human onslaught continued unabated. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, her fingers flying across the tactical console, provided Evelyn with a real-time assessment of the battle. "Commander, our fighters are inflicting heavy damage on the enemy's secondary vessels. Their point defense systems are being overwhelmed, and their armor is starting to buckle." Evelyn nodded, her gaze fixed on the shifting holographic display. "And the capital ships?" "Taking a beating, Mom," Chen replied, her voice tinged with a hint of grim satisfaction. We've managed to disable 3 more of their larger vessels, and their overall firepower is starting to wane." The Virexian commander, General Sarkin, watched the unfolding chaos with a growing sense of panic. His carefully crafted invasion plan, based on overwhelming the human defenders with superior technology and firepower, was falling apart before his very eyes. "Impossible," he snarled, his clawed hands clenching around the armrests of his command chair. "How can these primitives be turning the tide against us?" Evelyn, sensing the Virexians' growing desperation, knew that this was their chance to seize the initiative. "All units, focus your fire on the enemy flagship," she ordered, her voice cutting through the din of the battle. "Take that monster down, and the rest of their fleet will crumble." The human forces, their spirits buoyed by the sight of the Virexians' vulnerability, surged forward with renewed vigor. Their weapons blazing, they pummeled the enemy flagship, their attacks relentless and merciless. General Sarkin, his eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and fear, watched helplessly as his command ship was slowly torn apart by the human onslaught. The once invincible Virexian war machine, a symbol of their civilizational might, was being dismantled piece by piece. "Impossible," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This cannot be happening." But it was happening, and the human defenders were not about to let up. Evelyn, her face etched with a grim determination, continued to direct the assault, her tactical brilliance guiding the human forces to victory. As the Virexian flagship finally succumbed to the relentless barrage, its massive hull splitting apart in a violent explosion, a cheer went up from the human defenders. The tide had truly turned, and the mighty Virexian Empire was now on the defensive. General Sarkin, his once stoic demeanor shattered, stared in disbelief at the rapidly unfolding events. His carefully crafted invasion plan, based on the Virexians' overwhelming technological superiority, had been turned on its head by the sheer determination and resilience of the human colonists. Evelyn, sensing the enemy's wavering resolve, seized the moment. "All units, pursue the retreating vessels," she ordered, her voice ringing with authority. "Don't let them regroup. Hit them with everything we've got." The human fighters and cruisers, their weapons blazing, surged forward in pursuit of the retreating Virexian fleet. The aliens, their once unstoppable juggernaut now in disarray, struggled to maintain their cohesion as they fled the battlefield. As the Virexian vessels disappeared into the vastness of space, Evelyn allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The human colonists had done the impossible, turning the tables on their technologically superior foes through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. But she knew that the battle was far from over. The Virexian Empire, a civilization that had conquered countless worlds, would not take this defeat lightly, and Evelyn was determined to be ready for whatever came next. The human victory over the Virexian invasion force sent shockwaves through the colonial leadership, but Commander Evelyn Rains knew that their triumph was far from complete. As the enemy fleet retreated into the vast expanse of space, she could sense the looming threat of a more devastating counterattack. Summoning her senior staff to the command center, Evelyn's brow was furrowed with concern. "This isn't over," she began, her tone serious. "The Virexians are a proud and determined adversary. They won't take this defeat lightly, and I have no doubt they're already planning their next move." Lieutenant Sarah Chen nodded grimly, her fingers flying across the holographic display as she reviewed the tactical data. "Our intelligence indicates the Virexians are regrouping their forces and mobilizing their reserves. And the most worrying development." She paused, her expression grim. "They're deploying their dreadnoughts." Evelyn's eyes widened at the mention of the Virexian dreadnoughts, massive warships that were rumored to be capable of razing entire planets with a single salvo. "How long until they reach us?" "Based on their current trajectory and speed, we estimate they'll be within striking range in less than 48 hours, Chen replied, her voice tense. The assembled officers exchanged apprehensive glances, the weight of the situation palpable in the air. Evelyn knew that their hard-won victory was about to be put to the ultimate test. "All right, people, "Listen up," she said, her voice commanding attention. "We may have caught the Viraxians off guard, but they're not going to make the same mistake twice. We need to be ready for their next move. And that means we need a plan. A bold, audacious plan that will catch them off guard once again." Evelyn turned to the holographic display, her eyes narrowing as she studied the tactical data. "Their dreadnoughts are the key. If we can neutralize those, we'll cripple their ability to overwhelm us with pure firepower." Captain Liam Murdoch, a seasoned veteran, cleared his throat. "Commander, with all due respect, those dreadnoughts are behemoths. Our weapons barely made a dent in their shields during the last engagement. How do you propose we take them down?" Evelyn's lips thinned into a determined line. "By giving them a target they can't resist." She paused, letting the implication sink in. "We're going to lure them in and hit them with everything we've got." The room erupted into a flurry of concerned murmurs, but Evelyn raised her hand, silencing them. "I know it's a risk, but it's our only chance. We've already proven that we can outmaneuver and outthink the Viraxians. If we can draw them in close and overwhelm them with a coordinated assault, we might just have a chance at taking those dreadnoughts down." Chen's eyes widened in realization. "You want to use the colony as bait?" Evelyn nodded, her expression grim. "It's the only way, Sarah. We need to buy ourselves enough time to prepare a devastating counterattack, and that means sacrificing some of our defenses to draw the Viraxians in." The room fell silent, the weight of Evelyn's proposal hanging heavy in the air. The colonists were already reeling from the initial assault, and the thought of further devastation was almost too much to bear. But Evelyn knew that they had no choice. The fate of New Horizon, and perhaps the entire human race, rested on their shoulders. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said, her voice softening, "but we're running out of time. If we don't act now, the Viraxians will crush us once and for all." One by one, the officers stepped forward, their expressions resolute. "Whatever you need, Commander," Murdoch said, his gruff voice unwavering. "We're with you until the end." Evelyn nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "Then let's get to work. We've got a lot of planning to do." As the senior staff began to discuss the details of their desperate gambit, Evelyn steeled herself for the battle to come. The Viraxians had underestimated the human spirit once before, and she was determined to make them pay for that mistake, even if it meant risking everything. The air crackled with tension as the Viraxian dreadnoughts emerged from the inky blackness of space, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. Commander Evelyn Rains watched from the command center, her expression grim but resolute, as the enemy behemoths closed in on New Horizon Colony. "All units, stand by," she ordered, her voice calm and measured. "Wait for my signal." On the ground below, the human defenders braced themselves, their weapons primed and ready. They knew that the battle to come would be the most crucial of the entire campaign, a make-or-break moment that would decide the fate of their home. As the Viraxian dreadnoughts began bombarding the colony's defenses, raining down a hail of devastating energy beams and plasma torpedoes, Evelyn's fingers flew across the tactical console. "Now," she barked, her voice sharp. At her command, the human forces sprang into action, their own weapons unleashing a torrent of fire upon the Viraxian vessels. Caught off guard by the sudden, coordinated counterattack, the enemy dreadnoughts faltered, their mighty shields beginning to buckle under the relentless human assault. "Keep the pressure on," Evelyn shouted, her eyes fixed on the shifting holographic display. "We need to overwhelm their defenses before they can regroup." The human pilots and ground crews fought with a fierce determination, their skills honed by the previous battles. They knew that this was the moment they had been preparing for, the chance to deliver a decisive blow against the Viraxian invaders. As the battle raged on, the skies above New Horizon Colony became a dizzying maelstrom of light and fire. The Viraxian dreadnoughts, their once impenetrable shields crumbling, struggled to maintain their cohesion in the face of the human onslaught. General Tsarkin, the Viraxian commander, watched the unfolding chaos with a growing sense of panic. His carefully crafted plan to crush the human resistance with overwhelming force had been upended, and now his prized dreadnoughts were being systematically dismantled by the Colonial Defense Force. Impossible, he snarled, his clawed hands clenching around the armrests of his command chair. These humans should not be able to resist us. But the humans were resisting, and with every passing minute, the Viraxian advantage was slipping away. Evelyn, her eyes narrowed with fierce determination, continued to guide her forces, her tactical brilliance shining through as she exploited every weakness in the enemy's defenses. As the first Viraxian dreadnought succumbed to the human assault, its massive hull splitting apart in a brilliant explosion, a cheer went up from the Colonial Defense Force. The tide had truly turned, and the once unstoppable Viraxian Empire was now on the verge of defeat. General Tsarkin, his composure cracking, ordered his remaining dreadnoughts to concentrate their fire on the human command center. Destroy them all, he roared, his voice laced with a mixture of fury and desperation. The Viraxian vessels, their weapons blazing, turned their attention to the heart of the human resistance. Evelyn, her eyes widening, quickly relayed the order to her forces. All units, defensive positions. We need to hold them off until our reinforcements arrive. The human defenders scrambled to comply, their weapons unleashing a withering barrage of fire upon the Viraxian dreadnoughts. But the enemy vessels, their shields reinforced by the concentrated attack, continued to advance, their devastating firepower raining down upon the colony. Evelyn, her mind racing, knew that they were running out of time. The human reinforcements were still too far away to make a difference, and the colony's defenses were being slowly ground down by the Viraxian onslaught. As the battle reached its climactic moment, Evelyn made a split-second decision. All units, fall back to the rendezvous point, she ordered, her voice tinged with regret. We need to regroup and prepare for the next phase of the plan. Reluctantly, the human forces began to withdraw, their fighters and ground forces retreating in an orderly fashion. The Viraxian dreadnoughts, their weapons still blazing, continued their assault, the colony's defenses crumbling in the face of their relentless barrage. Evelyn watched the retreat with a heavy heart, her gaze fixed on the burning ruins of New Horizon Colony. They had come so close to victory, but now the fate of the human race hung in the balance. As she turned to lead her forces to the rendezvous point, she steeled herself for the final, decisive confrontation. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone, as Commander Evelyn Rains led her battered but resolute forces to the designated rendezvous point. Behind them, the once thriving New Horizon Colony lay in ruins, its defenses finally overwhelmed by the relentless Viraxian assault. Evelyn's heart was heavy with the weight of their sacrifice, but she knew that the battle was far from over. As her troops regrouped, she turned her attention to the task at hand, her mind racing with the details of the plan they had hastily assembled. "All right, people, listen up," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "We may have lost the colony, but we're not done yet. The Viraxians are closing in, and we need to be ready for them." Lieutenant Sarah Chen, her face etched with determination, stepped forward. "The human reinforcements are only a few hours away, Commander. If we can hold out until they arrive, we might just have a chance at turning the tide." Evelyn nodded, her expression grim. "That's the plan, but we're going to have to make the Viraxians pay dearly for their victory." She turned to the tactical display, her fingers flying across the console. "We've set up a series of ambush points along their projected route. If we time this right, we can cripple their fleet and leave them vulnerable to the incoming human forces." The assembled officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and resolve. They knew that the stakes had never been higher, and that the fate of the entire human race rested on their shoulders. "What about the colony?" Captain Liam Murdoch asked, his voice gruff with concern. "We can't just abandon it to the Viraxians." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but her gaze remained unwavering. "We don't have a choice, Liam. New Horizon is lost, and we need to focus on saving the rest of humanity. Once the reinforcements arrive, We'll mount a counterattack to retake the colony. But first, we have to survive this next encounter." The officers nodded, their expressions hardening with determination. They knew that Evelyn was right. The survival of their species depended on their ability to outmaneuver and outfight the Viraxian invaders. As the enemy fleet approached, the human forces took up their positions, their weapons primed and ready. Evelyn, her eyes narrowed with focus, directed the deployment of her troops, her tactical genius shining through as she exploited every weakness in the Viraxian formation. The battle that followed was a brutal and relentless affair, with both sides unleashing the full force of their firepower. But the human defenders, fueled by a burning desire to protect their home and their species, fought with a tenacity that the Viraxians had never before encountered. Slowly but surely, the human forces began to gain the upper hand, their carefully orchestrated ambushes and coordinated strikes chipping away at the Viraxian fleet's cohesion. General Xarkin, his once vaunted war machine crumbling around him, watched with a growing sense of desperation as his invasion force was systematically dismantled. "Impossible," he snarled, his clawed hands clenching in fury. "How can these primitives be defeating us?" But the humans were defeating them, their resilience and determination proving to be the decisive factors in the conflict. As the Viraxian fleet began to retreat, the human reinforcements arrived, their own ships joining the fray and delivering the final, crushing blow to the enemy's forces. In the end, the Viraxian invasion was turned back, their once mighty fleet reduced to a ragged collection of damaged and retreating vessels. Evelyn, her face etched with a grim satisfaction, watched as the enemy ships disappeared into the vastness of space, their tails firmly between their legs. "They won't be coming back anytime soon," she murmured, her voice tinged with a hint of triumph. "We've shown them that the human spirit cannot be broken." As the human reinforcements began the arduous task of rebuilding the colony, Evelyn knew that this was just the beginning. The Viraxian Empire, once thought to be unassailable, had been humbled, and the dawn of a new era had arrived, one in which humanity stood as an equal among the stars.